Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Minister, and delegates, friends. Thank you very much again for being with us here today. We understand there has been some delay, and we know that later on we're going to have a full hall again. Before starting, I would really like to thank the Minister for his patience, and apologies for starting late. I know he has a very tight schedule, but just before I make the introduction, I would just like to remind you about the app and the voting that we'll be having later on. For those who haven't attended yesterday, if you could kindly go download the website www.eventmobi.com/MMS, enter your email address, and then followed by your own password. If you have an iPhone, there is the menu button. Just press the button, and on the screen, add to home screen. If you're using Android, then at the corner, there is a shortcut, and you just add that shortcut to your screen. Now that will give you full access to the app, and throughout the sessions, depending on the moderators, we will have some questions, and those will be placed for voting, and we should have the results on the screen relatively instantly. And now for today's session, I cannot thank enough the Honourable Minister from the Office of the Prime Minister for being with us today. I know he has a very, very tight schedule. He has even been patient to allow us some more time because of the delays. Mr. Mizzi needs no introduction. He's well versed in the subject he's going to be talking to us today. And I would like to ask Mr. Mizzi to take the floor. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Gauci-Maistre. Thank you for putting up a great conference with attendees from across the globe. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be addressing this session, which focuses on the development of smart and environmentally friendly vessels and ships. The theme of this year's World Maritime Day for 2016, organized by the IMO, is shipping indispensable to the world. And this does strike the right chord, setting the scene to rekindle the global awareness on the importance of this very, very, very strategic industry. My intention is not to ponder on figures regarding the importance of the shipping trade. It is true, figures speak a million words. However, you all know the importance of the shipping industry. One can confidently state that everything in this room, from the smallest item to the energy sources, are here in part thanks to the contribution and the logistics provided by the shipping industry. The shipping industry is currently undergoing a revolutionary transformation, and modern ships manifest the greatness of this industry. And shipping is truly the cornerstone and the foundation of Malta's economy. It is a fact that shipping is one of the most well-regulated global industries. The industry is based on high safety, security, and environmental standards, and standards that have been developed under the auspices of the International Maritime Organization. On a European level, EU policy makers have embraced these standards and policies, particularly with respect to safety, and honed such measures to achieve a sound safety culture. We do commend these initiatives. As we move towards a low-carbon future, we are now seeing policymakers focusing more on the environmental aspects of the shipping sector. Today, it is a fact that shipping is the most fuel-efficient and carbon-friendly mode of transformation. This has been achieved both because of onerous regulations, but also out of economic necessities. As the world's population increases and emerging economies grow, shipping will respond to the demand. Therefore, we need to embrace the fact that today's efficiency in the industry is not sufficient to complement global efforts to combat climate change. We are now committed to keeping the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees. We all need to act on these objectives in a sustainable manner, and Malta is committed both in international fora as well as within the European Union to achieve these objectives. The legal framework is steadily increasing the appetite for the use of alternative fuels on board of ships. The IMO, the International Maritime Organization, has adopted measures such as regulations on energy efficiency for vessels. The European Union, as well, in line with the Energy Union strategy, has in place legislation incentivizing member states to develop a network of infrastructure allowing for the use of alternative fuels in transport, including the provision of LNG refueling points, liquefied natural gas refueling points, in 10 T-core ports. In Malta, we do have 2 10 T-core ports, such as the Grand Harbour, as well as Marsashlock Harbour. Furthermore, the use of low-sulfur fuels in EU waters by 2020 and additional future global measures to reduce GHG emissions in shipping in the sector incentivizes the use of alternative fuels. The scenario of the use of LNG for shipping is now becoming a reality. Malta's national energy policy dovetails with the future of energy-efficient ships and the use of alternative fuels. Whilst an intermediate solution, natural gas in Malta will be provided in the coming weeks through a floating storage infrastructure. In fact, our FSU will be arriving in Malta in the coming days. It will essentially go through the various safety drills, and then it will be berthed and alongside the purpose-built quay in Delhi Mara. The Maltese government is also pursuing a gas interconnection with the Trans-European National Gas Network for diverse uses. Although a number of alternative fuels such as methanol are being considered within the industry, Malta foresees LNG as an alternative fuel, which provides both a short and a mid-term solution to emissions reduction. It is fair to state that LNG is a clean fuel, nitrogen emissions are low, and it contains almost no sulfur. The financial benefit is also seen as a main driver for the use of LNG as a fuel. Furthermore, LNG ship technology is very advanced, and we're now seeing various cruise liner terminals, cruise liner operators who are also developing and building vessels which will be gas operated. Malta's LNG strategy, which in many ways mirrors the European Union, the EU Commission's recently adopted LNG strategy, sets to transform maritime transport environmental challenges into green opportunities. We would like to be seen as an early bird or a first mover in LNG bunkering in the future to service the Mediterranean Sea basins. Lessons learned from Malta's success stories in conventional fuel bunkering services, which include fuel oil as well as gas oil, are crucial to expand and create a market for LNG bunkering in the South Mediterranean. Malta does not intend to adopt a sit-and-wait approach, and a number of studies are being undertaken, such as geotechnical studies and various other studies to actually develop the infrastructure required for such bunkering services. I would like to announce that government shall embark on a technical study and a cost-benefit analysis in the coming weeks for the development of LNG as a marine bunker fuel in Malta. This will be an important study which will essentially look at the opportunities for Malta and the needed infrastructure to become a key player in LNG bunkering in line with the EU's LNG strategy. Consultations with key stakeholders will be undertaken, and we are keen to be a first mover in the Med on this particular issue. Such studies are being pursued to ensure that the future sustainable policies meet the needs of society. Malta's LNG strategy has far more reaching objectives. Surely it will strengthen Malta's economy, making it more competitive while also enhancing our energy security. However, the use of LNG as an alternative fuel for maritime transport would also provide a cleaner environment both ashore and at sea. ensuring that the sector's sustainability is achieved on all fronts. I am confident that the long-term use of this alternative fuel will help Malta reach its ambitious targets set out and outlined in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which was agreed within the United Nations. From my end, I would like to thank you for your patience and attending today's session. I would like to commend the organizers for organizing such a great conference with great speakers, and I would like to assure you that Malta, as a maritime operator, is always open for business. We are keen to hear new ideas and innovations, and we will quickly respond to innovative ideas by legislating quickly and creating the right environment for businesses to flourish. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
Minister, thank you very much indeed. It's very kind of you. As I said earlier, I know you have a very, very tight schedule. Just before I accompany you out, I'd like to introduce Bob Jaques, who is the moderator of the next session. Bob is the editor of Seatrade Maritime Review. Bob is very well known. And while I accompany Mr. out, I would kindly ask Bob and the next panel to take the stage. Thank you.
Yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second day of the Malta Maritime Summit. This session, Development of Smart and Environmentally Friendly Ships. I'd like, of course, to thank the organizers for putting on this splendid occasion and inviting me to moderate this session. I think Minister Mizzi has done a fantastic job setting the scene for some of the issues we're going to be discussing this morning. Yesterday, you may have heard a fellow moderator, Nigel from Lloyd's, saying that in his experience, it was the most challenging coincidence at the moment of, on the one hand, very difficult market conditions, and on the other, a very high regulatory burden. And of course, a lot of this regulatory burden, most one might say, falls in the environmental area. And we're going to be drilling down into that today, and we're going to be discussing a number of topics. And let me flag up some of the subjects I expect to be covered. We have, of course, the upcoming global cap on sulfur emissions, the sulfur content of fuel. And that's quite possibly going to be decided quite soon when that 0.5% limit is coming in. As you know, already there has been a phased-in reduction in sulfur content of fuels. The IMO has also been very proactive, as was pointed out in yesterday's session, in having already introduced an energy efficiency design index for new ships and a shipboard energy management plan for existing ships to try and limit CO2. But that is also something on everyone's radar, as the Minister mentioned, after the Paris Agreement. So that is something that both the IMO and the EU are bringing in plans to, first up, measure, record, and verify levels of CO2 emissions, and thereafter use that to try and reduce it. There is a little bit of controversy about the methodology of the two different regimes, and perhaps we'll be touching on that. Just a few weeks ago, the Ballast Water Management Convention entered into force with the requisite number of countries and amount of tonnage ratifying it. So as of next September, over a 5-year period, ships will be required to phase in very costly equipment to prevent the spread of harmful and invasive aquatic species. That's the Ballast Water Management Convention, I expect to be mentioned this morning. Perhaps further down the road, we have the Hong Kong Convention for the scrapping of ships and the requirement that all ships will carry an inventory of harmful materials aboard them from cradle to grave. And finally, we will perhaps, if time allows, double back a little bit onto the session yesterday. You will have seen that the title of today is the development of smart and environmentally friendly ships. And smart shipping is something that was touched upon very briefly in the presentation by Mr. Marotra yesterday. But it's certainly something that's on everyone's minds at the moment, and perhaps we'll have an opportunity to explore a little bit more the rationale and procedures for smart ships, use of big data, etc. Before then, we have a panel of really expert commentators today, and I'm going to introduce them all firstly, starting on my immediate left with Dr. Simone Borg, who is the ambassador for Malta on climate change. Welcome. Peter Hinchliffe, you heard yesterday, is the General Secretary of the International Chamber of Shipping. I'm delighted to welcome Greg Ogbefun, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, who is the President of the Shipowners Association of Nigeria. Then we have Heiko Kunst, who is Policy Officer for the European Directorate General Klima. Then we have from United Arab Shipbuilding Corporation, I think that's right, UASC, we have Mohammed Zaitoun, who is the Assistant Vice President, New Building Technical Projects. David Kerr is next to him, who is the Technical Attaché and Unit Coordinator for the European Union and the Deputy Permanent Representative of Malta, and he'll be really talking on Malta's plans when it assumes the EU presidency, what are policy objectives. And then again, finally, we welcome back Evangelos, who is from the cash buyer GMS Hellas. So first up, let me introduce and welcome Simone Borg, the Ambassador for Malta on climate change.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure and obviously a great honor to be here. I think that my intervention will mainly focus, from my background especially, on the role of the shipping industry in a carbon-neutral planet. I think you are all aware that the Paris Agreement will be coming into force next month. This is a great achievement, and you are also aware that the Paris Agreement was a decision taken at the global level by all parties, by a huge number of states, that by the mid-century, the planet will become a carbon-neutral planet. And in this context, the shipping industry obviously has a lot of importance in playing a fundamental role in achieving a carbon-neutral planet. You are all aware, I think, about the debate, especially during the negotiations for the Paris Agreement, that there was some disappointment that the Paris Agreement itself did not include maritime emissions. But this was an argument that floated around for a considerable number of times and years, that it was perhaps wiser not to delve into this aspect and leave MARPOL and leave the IMO institution as a whole to address maritime emissions. And it was this latter decision that prevailed. Some people have criticized this particular development, considering the Paris Agreement as being weak in not addressing either aviation itself or maritime emissions. But in reality, this is also perhaps lack of understanding of how international law works, because treaties themselves work usually in parallel, and it is not impossible for treaties to work together if there is the goodwill to do so. And I think that in these last few months, we have seen a lot of improvement and a lot of cooperation between IMO and its committees, its environmental committee, MARPOL, and the Paris Agreement parties to actually work together and come up with a shipping industry, with a plan for the shipping industry to actually participate in this objective of achieving a carbon neutral world. We have basically a number of legal instruments or commitments in these fora, these different international fora that are striving towards achieving a shipping industry which is carbon neutral eventually. And in one way, we have the MRV regulation, which the European Union has adopted and which will come into force in 2018, which is obviously binding on the member states of the European Union and which will ask all vessels that enter into the European Union ports to monitor their emissions from the starting point in order to obtain a reliable data collection system, which is then verified and reviewed, and therefore we will start engaging in having the required data to actually understand the contribution of the shipping industry to emissions, to greenhouse gas emissions. This was met with some criticism, and in fact, for quite some time, a number of states, including EU member states, were quite reluctant to go this way because it was felt that unless you had a multilateral approach, this kind of initiative would not work. It would obviously have an impact on competitiveness, etc. However, in the meantime, the IMO was, and even through MARPOL, we witnessed a lot of progress in achieving an energy-efficient shipping sector, a lot of plans to have an energy-efficient shipping sector, which by 2025 would ensure that vessels would be around 30% more efficient than they are nowadays, that they were in 2013 or 2014. And we are also witnessing that a number of shipping maritime nations are already engaging in actually having ships which are energy efficient before 2025. And this was a huge achievement because it established an energy efficiency index which ship owners and shipping nations could relate to and could plan ahead. It gave them enough flexibility to choose the technologies they consider to be most cost-effective in reaching the efficiency index, and therefore it allowed them enough room for maneuver without burdening or shocking the shipping industry itself. Then, on the other hand, you have the efficiency plan, which is also targets the shipping industry. The tonnage has to be, in the case of the index, it's about 4,000 tons, but the plan would apply for ships that have a tonnage of around 5,000. And it's really remarkable how a number of initiatives have taken place to improve energy efficiency through these shipping management plans, which again allow for enough flexibility to adopt the right methods, the most cost-effective, the most flexible and the most useful ones to achieve energy efficiency in shipping. In all of this, in all of these initiatives also, one notes the importance of data collection, and this is where convergence starts, in the sense that what started off as an initiative from the EU, perhaps, which created some concern and a lot of debate and a lot of resistance as to being too cumbersome in engaging in collecting data and for the EU states to ask ships flying flags of third parties to give them this data, this kind of data, Now, with the initiatives taken under IMO and MARPOL, the importance of data collection is intrinsic to both the Energy Efficiency Index and the Energy Management Plan. So in reality, it's actually collecting data under MRV would, in a way, converge and dovetail with the needs to collect data under the IMO and MARPOL initiatives. So we are seeing a lot of cooperation in this sense. This does not mean that there isn't more room for cooperation. This doesn't mean that there isn't some degree of concern. As I said, the MRV regulation will enter into force in 2018, and we will see how it works. But I think there is a huge incentive for all states to engage in data collection, in working for a shipping industry which is energy efficient and which reduces considerably greenhouse gases, because the success of the Paris Agreement depends on reducing emissions through the so-called nationally determined contributions. That is the commitments taken by each state to reduce emissions. And it is not inconceivable that once a state engages in having its own ships registered under its flags to reduce and become more energy efficient, that these would contribute to that particular state's reduction of emissions in the global scenario. So one could argue that eventually the so-called NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, could also be valued in terms of how much a state, a shipping nation, would render its shipping fleet more energy efficient. I think I will stop here because I've taken enough of your time for now, and I'm very keen to hear what the other speakers have to say on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simone. That was a splendid and very clear introduction from, as one would expect, from a professor. Am I right in saying yes? And so that's absolutely excellent and very upbeat about the energy efficiency advances of shipping. Now, that headline figure, a 30% reduction over the level of 2014 by
2025.
By 2025. I mean, that is one considerable achievement, I put it to you, ladies and gentlemen. We also heard from you about data collection. You mentioned that there has been some controversy about it. I think I'm right in saying that certain voices within the shipping industry are objecting to the idea that the data should identify the different ship owners. They merely wish the quantities to be assessed, because they fear that later this will open the door to punitive measures against individual ships and therefore ship owners. Do you have any comment on that, Professor?
Yes, there is this concern. Till now, however, if we look at the MRV regulation, the EU has been very cautious and explained that it is purely a data collection exercise. We cannot predict the future. Obviously, data collection usually eventually leads to some form of regulatory framework. But I am sure that good sense would prevail, and if the IMO and MARPOL keeps up with the pace, and we'll have a data collection system which would in many ways dovetail with that of the EU, perhaps the EU data collection system would be always more onerous and stringent. It's in the nature of the EU to be over-regulatory, but hopefully we could witness that there is eventually an IMO level of a legal framework more under the IMO and the MARPOL system rather than a regional approach which the EU would take. The EU is always very concerned that if nobody takes action, then things remain in abeyance, and therefore it usually pushes for action to be taken in this manner.
Thank you, and that's a subject we touched on yesterday as well. Thank you for that explanation. I'll take a question now, if anyone has a very quick question on this specific subject of MRV. Yes, Maria. Could we have a microphone to the front, please? Do I have a technician with a microphone? Maria, can you project? No, I'm sorry. Microphone is coming now, Maria. I'm sorry for the delay.
Good morning, everyone. Professor Borg, you mentioned about greener ships and about the value on registries. The greener the ships, the better the actual value of that registry. My question is, there are some theories that registries should punish and put like to no greener ships. And some of the people say that if you allow the no greener ships to pay for not having greener ships, there will be no incentive to move into greener ships because they know that by paying, they will get away with it. What do you think of that?
Thank you for that question. On behalf of the Panama Registry, as you know, the world's largest flag. Professor.
Yes. That is, in fact, always a huge challenge when it comes to regulating the environment. Some, in fact, have always interpreted the polluter pays system that you can pollute and pay, which is not actually the substance of the polluter pays objective. I would not think that the ultimate goal, not just of the EU member states, but of the entire shipping industry and also the IMO forum and MARPOL, is to engage in such a system of paying for going against, or rather for allowing non-energy efficient ships to get along with it just by paying a fee. I think in the end that would lead to lack of competitiveness, which is essential to the industry, which is essential to international trade. It will defeat, as you are observing, the whole purpose of having a carbon neutral world. And so I think the industry and the EU and the international fora are all aware of this possibility of having free riders, and I cannot predict the future. It will not be easy to find a solution to that, but one must find a way to avoid such free riders, because if there is no real incentive to go green, paying, we know that all the time, even on a national level. Whenever you introduce a tax or some form of monetary payment to pollute, it always backfires because people get used to it, and people afford it eventually, and so you defeat the whole purpose of achieving the results that you intended to achieve in the first place. I hope that, and I am sure that this is already an issue which all interested parties are keen to solve.
Very good. Thank you. Now, I'm going to move on. We heard quite a lot from Peter yesterday, so if he will allow, I think we may skip him at this stage, hold him in reserve for your more difficult questions later, and instead move on to Greg, who, as I told you earlier, is the president of the Shipowners Association of Nigeria. Now, we heard Simone talking about national contributions, and I wonder how Greg feels from the point of view of a shipowners association from a developing country, whether he feels that the CO2 reduction burden is being fairly shared around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob. I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to participate in this very important summit. We're talking about the development of smart ships and environmentally friendly ships, legislation, compliances, and punitive measures in case of not complying. But from where we come in Africa, we are looking at issues slightly differently, in the sense that we are not yet developed to a point of building ships, not to talk of improving on the quality of ships being built. Most of the vessels that we operate in Africa, particularly in Nigeria, are vessels that have been built in the developed world and sent to us. With respect to environmental friendliness, we will want to look beyond just carbon emission. We would like to look at the other aspects of ship operation that also can cause problems with respect to the environment. Now we're talking about the effluent discharges from the vessels. We're talking about things like the garbage disposals, the sludge disposals. How are they handled? In the developed world, you find that there are systems that are very efficiently put in place to handle such effluences. But in the developing nations such as Nigeria, we are still having fundamental challenges to be able to deal with these issues. One, you find that the infrastructure in the ports are probably not the best and not the most efficient, so there are issues related to that. And again, talking about emission control, what can we really do when we have vessels several decades old coming into our ports and are belting out smoke and high carbon content, carbon dioxide content into the atmosphere? We generally have to rely first on our Port State Control Authority to help check these situations, and in most cases as well, flag state control. But even talking about Port State Control compliance, it's got a direct relationship with infrastructural facilities that are available. Now, if you have a vessel that has some deficiencies in Port State Control regulations and needs to go to a shipyard, for instance, for repairs to deal with those deficiencies, and there are no shipyards in the environment. Now you find that both the inspector and the vessel owner are in dire straits what to do. So fundamentally, back in our developing nations, we are still grappling with trying to put in place appropriate infrastructure that would enable us operate in the shipping sector according to international standard. And that's where we'll be coming from. Whilst we wait for you to develop the smart ships and the environmentally more friendly ships, we'll be dealing with the existing ships in our environment and the challenges we are having to reduce the unfriendly environmental experiences that we are having. I would like to stop there because of time. Bob?
Yes, thank you very much, Greg. Yes, a refreshing perspective on the importance of infrastructure, for example. As before, ladies and gentlemen, is there any quick question before we move on that you would like to address to Greg, or indeed any of the other panelists would like to? Well, you've obviously explained your position very clearly. So I think without further ado, we shall move to your left to Heiko Kunst, who is the Policy Officer for the European DG Klima. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I think I will come over to give a PowerPoint presentation, short, on a subject which is, well, related to one of the subjects I'm covering. The other one would be to start with at European level. I spent most of the last 5 years to put in place the system for the monitoring, reporting, and verification of greenhouse gas emissions from ship, the MRV, which has already been addressed earlier in this session. But what I would like to do now is drawing your attention at the global level at measures which have already been taken by the IMO. Well, starting with Paris, but there I think Ambassador Borg already introduced us into the subject and explaining the really important agreement which has been achieved to limit the climate change and then also to call for a decarbonization of the global economy. And she also mentioned rightly that it's very important that all sectors are contributing to this quite challenging objective, because if you leave certain sectors out, others would need to do more, which would be extremely costly or technically very, very challenging. On this slide, you can see two things. First of all, the projection for the future emissions under business as usual. It gives, these light blue curves. It gives huge span of further developments. The upper one is probably coming from a time when everybody was very enthusiastic about the development of the global economy, very unlikely to happen. So it is more on the lower side, on the lower blue line, but still there would be an increase if no further measures are taken. And the other two lines, they show you what needs to be done to implement the Paris Agreement. It would require to peak the shipping emissions and then trying to reduce them towards decarbonization in the long term. So that's what would be needed in case shipping is contributing the same as other sectors are doing. And that should be, in principle, our aim. Let's now look at what has already been done. Actually, in 2011, so it's 5 years ago now, the IMO adopted the first ever global measure for a certain sector to reduce its, or to limit the increase of its greenhouse gases. And this was done via the introduction of a mandatory efficiency standard, which is basically a CO2 efficiency standard for new-built ships since 2013. And this requires reductions compared to a baseline. And this baseline is basically the average of the ships built between January 1999 and January 2009. And if you look in a graphical presentation, it's a bit like this. So it's the of course, size of the ship has also an impact, as we all know, large ships are per ton kilometer or ton mile more efficient than smaller ones. It's just the normal economies of scale. So that's why these curves are going down. And basically the dashed line and then the dark line on the top, that's the baseline, which was also the reduction requirement for the first 2 years. And the further lines are the requirements for 2015 in green, for 2020 orange, and the purple one is for 2025. And that's indeed reduction of 10, 20, respectively 30% compared to the baseline. So that's already quite, well, it looks at least like a very ambitious objective for these new builds. I think that's really great achievement, but there is even better news. If you look at the points on this graph, in particular the dark points, that's the real performance of the ships which have been built in 2013 and 14. And you see they are far below the requirement of the upper line, and even for the segment, the container ships, most of them are already now below the requirements they have to fulfill in 2025. So actually what they achieve is a reduction already today of 40% compared to the average of the ships which have been built 10 years ago. And I think that's really an amazing achievement. And putting this a little bit in the context of other ship types, we see that for container ships with the almost 40%, it is a bit similar to the situation of the general cargo ships, which are at around minus 45% to baseline. And the reductions achieved for other ship types are less drastic, but we still see that they are basically overachieving the requirements for the year 2020, which are currently under revision in the IMO. And with this observation, I think you can also draw a conclusion what could be done in this ongoing revision. I think what we should do is we shouldn't miss the opportunity to adjust our framework of the EDI to the realities we can already observe, which are indeed for certain segments quite amazing. And to come to some conclusions, also some other observations, we have indeed the over-compliance for almost all ship types. Not for all of them. There are some segments where the situation is a little bit different. I think that allows to conclude that the EDI was a highly cost-effective measure. So the extra cost for building these more efficient vessels are apparently paid off by the fuel cost savings. otherwise the ships would not over-comply with the standards they have to meet. And also another observation is that the EDI regulation contained a so-called waiver that flag states could basically opt out from the requirements, in particular for developing countries. But what we've seen is nobody used it. And the only logic or economically logic explanation would be because economically it doesn't make sense to use the waiver. The EDI is the way forward to build not only energy efficient but also cost-effective ships. And studies suggest that there are few cost savings linked to the EDI, which amount to annually around $50 billion in 2020. We also have seen some studies going a little bit more into detail to analyze the main drivers, and the two main drivers seems to be really the improved ship design. So the hull design was improved compared to the ships we've seen before, and for certain segments, in particular container ships, we also see that the design speeds have been reduced also to save fuel. And as already mentioned, well, these conclusions, I think they should be really used to increase the level of ambition of the EDI in this ongoing review, which is being discussed in the MEPC later this month. And we believe as European Commission that this would be really a very excellent signal of leadership of the IMO in terms of tackling climate change for shipping. Thank you.
Thank you, Heiko. Another good news presentation, and it leads very nicely on to the next, which I think is effectively going to be a case study of exactly one of these ship owners that is exceeding the requirement. UASC has introduced, with its new 14,000 and 18,000 TEU vessels, what are claimed to be the greenest container ships in the world. They are LNG ready, so as we heard earlier from Minister Mizzi, here's another example of an early adopter of that new form of clean energy. So welcome please Mohammed from UASC to talk more about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to be participated in this panel discussion, and I would like to go through our new buildings program, which consists of 6 18,000 TEU ships and 11 15,000 TEU ships. The contract signed August 2013, and we have made a different approach by building our technical specification and going to the shipyards, asking them, we need to build these ships, and not the conservative concept, which you ask the shipyard, we need to build a ship of such size, so he sends you the technical specs, and later on the negotiation goes on and sign a contract. And this was new to the shipyards, and they were saying that this not adopted to do it. But at the end, as a ship owner, we have to be proactive rather than reactive. When we build a ship, I personally believe the ship is a business unit, not a ship from A to B as the previous school or the olden days. We are building a ship of a couple of $100 million of US dollar, which could stay in operation for the next 20 years. So we have to consider and make a well study by following science and technology on what will happen after 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, 15 years, and so on. So we have gone through full optimization and integration of the ships. So we have optimized our speed profile, and we have not gone through by keeping additional main engine power, which we don't need for it. We have gone through cargo optimization, which is the first time total cargo solution, not the conservative way, which for a container ship, the hatch cover and the sail guide extensions, it is a segregated system. It is one cargo system. We have asked the shipyards for 3 options. LNG ready from day one for a trading from Far East to Europe for full round voyage. Then second option for half round voyage. And third option for the LNG ready. This was in 2013, considering at the time the LNG logistic was not so ready as of today. And also this is, I have to highlight and say that the logistic, LNG logistic between 2013 and 2016, it is a major influences by availability of LNG and potential of building LNG bunkering, as we hear from the minister just half an hour or 1 hour back. So this was all in consideration, and we have said, okay, let's go for the option of LNG ready, and when the logistic and of course the investment cost is reasonable, then we can easily go for retrofit, so we maintain the flexibility. And LNG ready means the main infrastructure, which must be done during the construction stage of the ship. So we have the DF gensets, we have the power management system on gas mode but on freeze, we have the boiler, we have the AIP from the class, we have the tank location, the structure of the ship. So LNG ready means what is exactly needed to be done during the construction stage of the ship, which cannot be done easily or cannot be done during the retrofit stage. So we have gone through this exercise, and we have made our ship for LNG ready by doing additional investment. And we have got for the first time the first notation LNG ready from the class DNV GL. As well, as I said, we have worked on optimizing speed, not on just a third power engine, and we have squeezed each gram of SFOC to ensure that, of course, economical beneficial for us as a ship owner, to have the lowest fuel consumption, because at the end it is a simple equation, it is slot cost per TEU as compared to our competitor. So we have achieved a very good, promising fuel consumption a day, which of course lead to lowers the CO2 emission. And we have increased and optimized our cargo system, which, as I have said, we are relying or believe in actual cargo, not nominal cargo. Let me say, or allow me to use, we don't care about nominal capacity. This will not pay. But we are keen on actual capacity, and this is how we have the world record of carrying up to now 4 times. We have carried the last record, 18,780 container on our ships, delivered ships. So we have achieved the low CO2, and our EEDI, I'm pleased to say this, and according to our EEDI certificate from the class, it is 50% below the 2025 IMO requirements. So as in 2015, 2016, we are pleased that we have achieved this, we have made this good achievements. Working also, it is, as I said, the ship is a business unit working parallelly with, for logistics with different ports in communication and contacts with different ports on LNG bunkering. And I keep saying within 3 years, this is, the logistics has been moved very fast in LNG. And this is, reflects how the shipping, the changes in the shipping industry is extremely fast and beyond expectation. So as I keep saying, proactive is better than reactive, to be in the middle with flexibility, to have the upper hand to move to the direction whenever the industry needs or demands. A port like Rotterdam is ready for bunkering a ship of 18,000 TEU in port while the ship in operation. I know that in China they are working on, in Malta here, as I hear today, Singapore, in the Middle East, in other European ports. So it means this is coming fast. And this make our ships ready and flexible whenever the need to do the retrofit, we can do it easily. So we have achieved really very efficient ships and very green ships, proactive from us. And this is in brief, this is our reality achievement to the industry, that we have the most efficient ships with LNG ready, shore notation LNG, shore power notation as well as first notation in the industry. And this is just a quick introduction, I can say.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. And I think really we have to congratulate you on these fantastic ships that you've built. You've been a trailblazer in environmental terms. I understand from earlier comments by your CEO that there was a hope, at least, that Jebel Ali in the United Arab Emirates would develop LNG bunkering. Do you have any update on that?
Yes, there is Jebel Ali and more potential as well.
Okay, thank you. Certainly infrastructure is an area to watch. And Mohammed mentioned already the new IMO requirement on the sulfur limit of fuels, which is, of course, one of the main drivers for the adoption of LNG. I think I'm correct in saying. And there we have a situation, as you probably know, where the current global limit, I think it's 3.5% sulfur content in fuels, has to be reduced to 0.5%, either in 2020, if the supply is available, or in 2025. And as I understand it, a decision might be taken quite soon as to whether it's going to be the earlier deadline or the later one. I don't know if anyone has any inside knowledge on that. I've been told that there are conflicting studies, one that says there is enough fuel available and one that says there isn't. So I thought if Rebecca is with us, are you there, Rebecca? We could maybe do an audience poll at this stage. You'll remember yesterday there's an app that you can consult, and we can do a quick straw poll of views about whether this new 0.5% global sulfur cap will be introduced, in fact, in the earlier deadline of 2020, whether it might be pushed back to 2025, or indeed, should supplies prove to be not there at all, whether it might be delayed further. So, Rebecca, are you there to activate this poll for us, please? A deathly silence. Perhaps somebody could try and find Rebecca and see if we can activate the poll. Thank you. In the meantime, do we have any questions now on either of the last two presentations, EEDI or indeed the UASC test case study? Yes, gentleman there, if we could have a microphone, please.
Good morning, everybody. My question is to the panel. In terms of environmental footprint that we have industry-wise, is there a study where we know where does the shipping industry stand in terms of ranking? And with the proposed changes that are suggested, where do we intend to, how do we intend the shipping industry to rank in terms of environmental footprint?
Okay, thank you. Before you answer that question, and with apologies, we don't seem to have this entirely in sync, but I see that the clock is going now to answer this question. So those of you who are app happy and have that voting system up on your mobiles, you've got a minute left to decide on that. Normally we have, do we have the questions up there? No, we don't. It's a fairly simple question. 2020, 2025, or a later date? Options 1, 2, or 3. Okay, while our technicians at the back try and collate those results, and perhaps while those of you who are minded and able to vote do so, we can take the answer to that question. Is that something, Heiko, that you can chip in on?
Well, at least partly as it concerns greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, shipping is currently contributing 2.5% to the global total greenhouse gas emissions. This seems to be not a very impressive figure. It is roughly about the same as for international aviation.
What's the feed?
And of course, other industrial sectors are to many of them by far less. So I think it's better to rank it, to consider international shipping or international aviation as some kind of country, and then you compare against the other emitters. And if you do this, I think shipping would be number 7 or 8 of the ranks of emitters. So it's not insignificant. And if no action is taken under the Paris Agreement, where the others have to decarbonize, of course, this 2.5% would increase. So that's why we want to take action in the IMO to prevent this actually happening. But that's, of course, for CO2 only. Answer.
Thank you. I hope that answers your question, sir. Anyone else? Yes, lady in the second row here. If you could wait for the microphone, please.
Good morning. I just wanted to ask Mr. Zaytoun, since there was so much talk about environmental requirements impacting negatively on competitiveness, how being so much ahead in terms of environmental requirements in your company, how has that impacted on competitiveness, and how have you overcome this?
Do we have a result
already? From the positive side, yes, we have better efficient ships, so better slot cost than our competitors. So initiative in lowering our emissioning as much as possible. And as I said, 50% below the 2025 requirements. Positively as well, keeping in mind, as we are hearing since yesterday and today and continuous and hot topic discussion, the low sulfur, which might come in 2020. So could imagine a container ship, which the major trade is the Far East Europe. If the EU goes for the 2020 0.5, it means all EU under the ECA area. And as I know as well, China, they are trying to be clean country and they are pushing strongly. It means in 2020, again, if the IMO ratify or the EU will go alone, then you have to trade your ship more than 65 to 70% of the entire route under the ECA area. So you have 3 options. And keep in mind, the oil price, no one can predict. I don't think so an expert can tell us tomorrow the oil price will be $200 or $20 per ton. No one can predict this. So let's assume the oil price will go back as 3 years or 2 years and have the price. So the ship owner who's trading in this Far East Europe, they have 3 options. You go on MGO, and if the oil price will be $100, then you have to pay 800 to 1,000 ton fuel per ton. And if your ship is consuming 180 ton a day, multiply by 800 to 1,000, is that? So you have to have very rich ship owner. So this one side. Or you go for scrubber. Is it the scrubber technology ready for 18,000 TEU ship of length over or 400 meter and beam of 60 meter? This is a question for the scrubber manufacturer. Or you go for alternative fuel, whether it's LNG or methanol, and if you have to have, as a ship owner, every ship owner have his own strategy plan. So you have to have your business case. Is it the LNG is suitable and convenient fuel? So efficient ships, it is very positively, of course, a big advantage to the ship owner, maintain flexibility, because the shipping industry, it is not the frozen shipping industry as 7 years back. I'm not saying 17 years back, I'm saying 7 years back. Frequently you are getting, there is a demand, there is needs to navigate and deviate and try to survive. So efficient ships is one of it.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, and thank you for also outlining the different options of compliance, because we're going to come on to that with our questions in the app. Now, that first question, you do still have another 20 seconds to answer that, because of the technical difficulties of getting that sorted. You have to go into the Malta Maritime Summit app. There you'll find something, polls and messages, I think it's called, the section. You go in there, and then you can vote. So you've got another 15 seconds to do that. And there's going to be a second question, so don't go away from that app. However, first up, we will come to a result on whether people think it's going to be likely to be 2020, 2025, or later. And then I might actually ask Peter at this stage to chip in, because he's got his ear close to the ground on such matters, and I'm sure his vote will carry a lot more weight. Rebecca, could you close the poll and see if we can throw up on the screen the results to that first question, please? There we go. So we seem to have a clear majority. Is it 54? Yeah, 54% think it's likely to be the later deadline of 2025. 27% think the earlier one, and the remainder think it might be postponed even further. Well, let's hear what Peter has to say about that, and whether he thinks a decision could be taken as soon as at the end of this month.
Thank you, Bob. Well, I'm afraid I don't agree with the audience. I think my reading of my own crystal ball is that it's extremely likely that a political decision will be made in 2 weeks' time to go for the 2020 date. Bob is right, there are two studies on the table, the official IMO study, which claims there is enough fuel available, and a supplementary study done by a couple of industry bodies, not ICS, which says there isn't enough fuel available. My view is that, as I said, the decision will be taken. It will be 2020, and then we know we have 4 years or 3.5 years to get to 2020. The issue then is there are some questions about the fuel availability, which is quoted in the IMO study. Some of the fuels quoted are not suitable for marine use. We know that. But actually, suppliers are required to supply fuel which is compliant with the ISO standard for marine use. And so therefore, the owner should have confidence that when he's buying fuel, he should be able to get compliant fuel. If he ends up getting non-compliant fuel, obviously there is a mechanism to deal with that. It's messy for the owner, it's very expensive. But I think that over this period, the stability of knowing that it's going to be 2020, in accordance with my crystal ball, then I think that will help us to make sure that the refineries get their act together and deliver the right fuel, and the owners are alive to getting compliant fuel.
Okay, thank you, Peter. 2020, you heard it here first. We'll see. A second question now. Which alternative fuels or alternative abatement methods do we think are most likely to be adopted? And there's going to be a second poll here. And the first one would be distillate fuel. The second one would be low sulfur fuel, low sulfur heavy fuel oil, I think it is at the moment. Then there is the option of scrubbers. These were mentioned by Mohammed. Then there is, of course, LNG, the route that UASC is embarked upon, or there is some other method. So you should, on your app, find these choices: distillates, low sulfur, heavy fuel oil, scrubbers, LNG, some other method. So if you'd like to vote now, please, you've got 2 minutes. While we just do that voting, if there's anybody, is there another question out there at this stage? Either to our panelists or to the remarks you've just heard from Peter about the likely adoption date? While we still have a little bit of time, the poll is ticking, the clock there. Peter, as you have the microphone, so to speak, can I also ask you to make a quick comment from the ICS's perspective about ballast water management, the BWM convention that, as you will all know, is due to enter into force now next September, but there's still a lot of unhappiness, I think is perhaps the word, about the lack of clarity between the different standards that the US Coast Guard and the IMO are adopting. Peter, it was mentioned yesterday, but would you like today to add anything more on that subject?
Well, I think I can only repeat what we said yesterday. I think the key points came out, but just very briefly, what I explained yesterday was that owners who are trading internationally will have to buy equipment type approved under the IMO process, and they have 5 years to do that. In accordance with, they can align that requirement with their dry dockings, which is a concession we won a couple of years ago. The problem then is if you want to trade to the United States, you may find that the equipment you have bought in ignorance of what the US standard is going to be may require you to take that equipment out and refit it with something else in a timescale which will probably be 5 to 10 years. So it's extremely messy. It's very unfortunate that the US has taken this very hard line. And in fact, I was talking to the Coast Guard and the EPA in Washington last week. There is no sign whatsoever of the US backing down on this. The only light at the end of the tunnel is that currently 3 equipments are with the Coast Guard for approval. Their KPI, if you like, is that they should issue that notice of approval within about 4 weeks of receipt. So within the next month or so, we should start to get an indication of which equipments the US is type approving.
Great, thank you for that last point of information and reiterating the points of yesterday for anyone who wasn't here. Okay, the results should be in now about which alternative fuels or abatement methods. Rebecca, could we have the scores on the doors, please? Aha, so there we go. I think UASC has a strong vote of confidence there in that LNG seems to be the preferred solution, followed by low sulfur, sort of existing fuel, but a low sulfur variant of it. Then there's the marine diesel oil, the distillates. Scrubbers, very low score, or one has to say. And likewise other. Okay, I think those results speak for themselves, unless we have time later to come back to that. I should just point out for you, anyone worried about the schedule or anxious to have their coffee, that this session has been extended through for another quarter of an hour, so it will now be finishing at 1:45 rather than 1:30 because we started earlier. So we've still got a couple of presentations to get through. And without further ado, we're going to go back to the European topic because we've heard a lot about Malta's upcoming presidency of the EU Council. And here to tell us a little bit more what they might be doing on the marine environmental front, we have David Kerr, who is the technical attaché and the deputy permanent representative of Malta to the European Union. So, David. Welcome, please.
Thank you, Bob. I've got a presentation. I mean, I don't know if you would like to start off on the issue of the uptake when it comes to